This video is about the mythical AMD K12, the ARM CPU for servers. And there is actually no official information, so that's why it is kind of mythical. But I was lucky, I found some information from some source about architecture, and the informations are really surprising. And there is a reason why it's kept hidden. The source is saying that the AMD K12, the ARM architecture, was the primary target for AMD at the time. So Zen2 x86 core, which was kind of sister core, it was secondary actually target for AMD. So it's very surprising because today we consider as a Zen architecture as the main product of AMD, but back in 2014 and 15 it was not like this actually. Let's recap what we know actually about K12. We know that AMD planned this core for 2017, the same as was released Zen1, and we know that it was taped out in 2015 the same way like the Zen1 was taped out. But we know that it was cancelled back in 2015 and Jim Keller left AMD for the second time. So this is the official information, and AMD cancelled the whole ARM lineup because there was a Opteron's 1100. It was based on some Cortex cores. So they canceled the whole ARM-based server lineups. Okay, let's go back to new information. So regarding the architecture, there is information about the 4 LAUs, which is the same what is having also Zen1, but there is a one special branch for jumps. So it's kind of one pipeline wider. So instead of 4 pipes, it has 5 pipes in the integer. And in terms of memory units, it has 3 memory units, and Zen1 has only 2 memory units. So the total integer width is 6 versus 8. So AMD K12 was approximately 1/3 wider than Zen1 architecture, and this is probably estimating the IPC probably 20% more in integer. So let's talk about Zen1 architecture because it's really related to AMD K12. And we know that the Jim Keller came from Apple, and it was in back 2012, and Apple A7 Cyclone was released 2013. So Jim Keller went from Apple to AMD when actually the Apple A7 chip was already taped out. So he went to AMD with all the knowledge, and it's kind of public secret that AMD Zen1 is kind of really similar to the Apple A7 Cyclone. So the similarities, it has 4 LAUs, Zen1, the same way Cyclone has also 4 LAUs. It has 2 address generation units for the memory, and the same also Apple has 2 generation units in the memory. But we know actually that there is also the third pipeline, which is the store pipeline. There is 2 load pipelines and 1 store pipeline, but it's fed by these address generation units. So it's not actually in the schematics. It should be somewhere the pipeline here. I would like to also point out some really interesting thing about the Zen floating point unit, because according to the documentation, we can see that there is a really different functionality for the floating point, because those simplified schematics is actually showing there is a 2 units for the multiplication and 2 units for the addition. So this is kind of in the picture, but there is a lot of other functionality, like a 1 division unit and a square unit. This very complex multi-cycle unit is here, but there is only one. And there is also 1 store unit, actually. This is kind of surprising. And you can see for the integer addition, there is only 3. Well, only, it's like a more than the floating point, more units, but multiplication there is only 1, and only 1 shifting unit for the integer. So it's and there is actually no difference between the Zen1 and Zen2. Just the Zen2 is a 256-bit wide, so it's a double wider, but the functionality actually remains the same. This is kind of interesting. And another interesting thing is here in the floating point, in the load store units, it's capable of 2 load instructions per cycle and 1 store instructions per cycle. So, and also Zen1 actually. So this is kind of evidence that even Zen1 has a third pipeline here. So let's talk about the AMD K12 architecture. So we know the architecture of the Zen1. This is the official information. Even this pipeline for the store is kind of hidden. Okay, but in terms of micro-ops, yeah, it can do only 2 memory micro-ops per cycle. Regardless, there is even the third pipeline, right? So it's really issuing, it can really perform 10 micros per cycle, while Zen2 actually can do 11 micros per cycle. So the K12 was aiming for the similar die size, but because of the simpler decode of the ARM architecture, it allows you to use the transistors for execution units. So that's why there is a bigger engine. And the bigger engine is, as it was specified in the source, there is a 4 LAU unit here, which is really similar to the Zen1 and Zen2 architecture. There is no information about the division unit and multiplication unit, but there is information about actually the branch units. And K12 has special branch pipeline here. So it's actually kind of 5 wide, this integer. And the last LAU unit is shared with the branch. So it's able to do 2 branches per cycle, the same way like the Intel Skylake, Ice Lake, and also Zen. So it's a kind of standard, but it's wider. And if you take a percentage, it's 25% wider than Zen1. And not only here in the integer, it's in the memory units, it's suggested it has 3 address generation units. So one is load store, one is only load unit, and one can generate only store unit. So it's actually kind of it's like a 50% wider in the memory units. It's the same wide as Zen2 actually. So it actually Zen1 is 4 and 2 memory units is 6 wide in terms of integer workloads, and AMD K12 is 5 plus 3, so it's actually 8 wide. So in fact, so it's much wider. It's actually 33% wider than Zen1 in terms of integer calculation. So the expected IPC could be somewhere about 20%, maybe even higher. Let's talk about the distribution of the instructions in the typical code, because this will show us why the K12 was suggested to have a special branch unit, special pipeline for the branch unit actually, and the second branch is shared with the LAU. And the answer is here. Among all the instructions in the typical code, like an average, there is a lot of branch instructions. So, and you can see here, this is store instructions. There is about 15% of the store instructions. There is about 25, sometimes more for the x86 as a more load instructions. But for the ARM, it's about 25%. This is about 50, maybe 10%. And there is like 15% instructions for the branching. So we can be sure that most of the time is one port for the branching is fully utilized by the branching instructions. So this is the idea actually behind the special pipeline for the branching. This is the Cortex A72. This is the quite old. This is 2015. Well, maybe not that old, but this is the Raspberry Pi 4. Kind of slow CPU, but it is not that bad actually. And you can see there is a two LAUs. There's a special design, two simple LAUs here, and you can see here also the multi-cycle for the division and multiplication. So it has a 3 LAU design plus one special branch. And this is not the exception, because Cortex A73, this is the French Sophia design. This has again special pipeline for the branch. Cortex 75, this is the evolution of this French Sophia cores. Again, there is another branch special unit. And even the Cortex 76, this is the Austin desktop level, this desktop class CPU, let's say. Again, you can see here there is a one special pipeline for the branching. It has it's much wider, it's a 3 LAUs plus one branch pipeline here. And it's even getting more interesting here. Cortex 77, it has a 4 LAUs here and two branch pipelines. And also the new ones, the Cortex X1 and 72 and 78 also is keeping two branch pipe. And the suggestion is, and the latest information about the Apple A13, it says that Apple actually is using 3 pipelines for the branching actually. Apple A13 Lightning actually is using 3 branch pipelines. So this is the idea behind actually to have a special pipelines for the branching, because it doesn't block your execution units. Yeah, so ARM CPUs is using special branch pipelines really long time. So, and it's bringing a lot of IPC actually, because if we compare the x86 core to the standard AMD and Intel, you can see here actually that Intel has a jump here. There is a jump unit. This is equivalent to the branch. It actually have a 2 branch units, probably the same like a Zen has a 2 branches somewhere here on those 2 ports. And but when you are running like tight loop, there is a maybe every 4th, every 5th instruction is the jump. So this port is fully utilized by the jump for the branches. So actually the CPU is actually able to use only 3 LAUs. And if there is a more jumps, sometimes it's also disabled this port. So actually this 4 LAU CPU is actually kind of degraded to kind of 2.5 LAU CPU. So there is a big limitation. So this is the idea behind some special ports for branching here. And this is the idea also for the K12. Even the K12 is using two branches. This second one is shared with here. This is probably that Jim Keller probably saw that they can utilize 100% this first branch, and this one would be maybe 50-60% utilized. So maybe it's beneficial to, there is a more benefits to share it with one LAU, which is maybe not that utilized. So it depends on the calculation and the design of the CPU. But yeah, so you can see this is just the special branch pipeline can increase the IPC a lot. And if you are interested in how many IPC actually these two branches can bring, we can compare the Cortex A77, which is also having those two branches. It's on another slide. I will go here actually, and okay, this is the Cortex A77. You can see 4 LAUs here and 2 branch pipelines. This is the data measured in NNTech, and I'm just using their results. And this is kind of really interesting, because if we compare this Snapdragon 865 and we compare it to Zen1 architecture, we can measure here the integer performance and the floating point performance. This is pretty good benchmark because we can separate integer and floating point. And the measured data, when we calculate the points per gigahertz, we take the score divided by frequency, we will get the points per gigahertz. And when we compare the Cortex A77 score to Skylake or Zen2, it's almost the same. We will get actually that the Cortex A77, the smartphone CPU, actually has a 8% higher IPC than Zen2. This is really surprising. And so actually this is the advantage of not only the special branches, but this is the advantage of wider backend design. The integer, there is a 4 LAUs plus 2 branches for, so it's actually 6 wide in compared to 4 wide on x86 CPUs. And you can see there is a 8% IPC advantage. And yeah, you can see also the floating point. It's not bad, it's like a 3% faster also in the floating point. So the ARM, despite is having only 128-bit neon vector units, it's actually doing pretty good. Zen2 has a stronger floating point, but still is losing in compared to Cortex A77. And the new Cortex X1 is like a 30% above that. Guys, this is starting to be really interesting, this competition for the maximum performance here between x86 and ARM. But in terms of IPC, you can see that those special branch units, they help a lot. So the K12, my opinion, my suggestion for the K12 is that it would really have about 20% higher IPC. My suggestion is really 20% higher IPC over Zen1. And that's actually a lot. And when the source is saying the K12 was primary target, so it's probably, this is actually the technical explanation. Yeah, there was just more IPC in this CPU. Now let's talk about why the K12 was cancelled. Because it's really strange that you have a CPU with a higher IPC than actually the Zen, and you are going to cancel it. Even then there is evidence that it was taped out already. This is really strange. You have a really powerful CPU and you are going to cancel it, even it's like already for the production. And we need to actually look into history and because there is some few coincidences what happened in 2015. But before we do that, I remember when actually AMD announced K12 canceling, and Jim Keller left, and I was kind of surprised that Jim Keller is leaving, because it happened for the second time, and when Jim Keller left for the first time, it was big problem for AMD. So, but on the other hand, canceling some ARM, which I considered back in 2015, it's a really weak platform and it cannot compete in terms of performance with the x86. So I considered it's yeah, why not? Nobody can make an ARM faster than x86. I was wrong, of course, but at that time, it's like 5 years ago. Today we know that the fastest CPU on the world are ARMs, right? The supercomputers, the Fujitsu Fukaku computer. But back then, there was no supercomputer. Actually, there was a kind of not really successful approaches to make a high-performance ARM cores. But in 2015 there was the Raspberry Pi Cortex A72, which was really like a less than half IPC than Intel Skylake. So it was not really competition to x86. Yeah, in terms of IPC, back in 2015, it was a Cortex A72, which was really like lower IPC than the Bulldozer, like a half of the IPC than the Intel Haswell and the Skylake. It was also released 2015, somewhere here. It's like a Skylake. So it was really bad. So all the attempts to make a high performance servers on those kind of low IPC cores was kind of funny, you know. But so in 2015 it looked like the ARM is really low performance machine. Today we know that yeah, they have a totally different performance. The IPC is way better than the x86, but back in 2015 here, yeah, nobody actually, yeah, Cortex, this Apple A9 was already released 2015, but this is Apple, this is special, you know. But most of the world is using the other Cortex cores here, and those are really low performance. And if you look at the real numbers on the Geekbench, those cores like this Cortex A72, the Raspberry Pi 4 has a really low, let's say less than half IPC than Intel. This is Coffee Lake Refresh, the 9900K. So it's really low IPC product. But the K12 was aiming, but 2015, if we take a look on the Twister, Apple A9 Twister, year 2015, the same year. So some engineers and some CPU enthusiasts already back in 2015, they knew actually that they have a 10% higher IPC than actually the Skylake. So yeah, ARMS back in 2015 was actually stronger, more performant than x86 already, but it was Apple. So AMD with a 20% uplift over the Zen1, and Zen1 is probably somewhere here. It's like a losing 15% to Zen2 according to the Geekbench. So the K12 would be probably on really similar level like the Apple A9 Twister. And it was aimed for 2017, so there was kind of delay in terms of IPC, but they was really keeping the high pace. They was keeping with the Apple kind of, even they were kind of delayed, but more IPC than x86, more IPC than the Intel, and yeah, it was, and more than double IPC than actually the Cortex A72. So actually AMD was really ambitious. This plan was really ambitious and really good. So here you can see why actually AMD canceled the K12, even it was better product, because we can see PA Semi was established 2003. Jim Keller jumped on board 2004 as a vice president. 2008 was bought by Apple, all PA Semi, and they started right away development of A6 Swift. It was their first CPU in-house developed, but it was 32-bit and only 2 LU, really narrow. But the first really ambitious was the Apple A7 Cyclone, and it started probably 2009, or maybe it started the same year as the A6 Swift. We don't know, but yeah, the key person was there, Jim Keller, no doubt. And back in 2015, 2012 actually, sorry about that, 2012 here, Jim Keller leaves Apple and goes to AMD actually. And you can see Apple A7 Cyclone was like a 1 year before release. So it was actually probably already taped out, the architecture was finished, and they was probably working, and I'm pretty sure they were working on Apple A8 Typhoon and A9, and probably starting designing Apple A10 Hurricane also. And also probably they had some studies what is the next gen, because Apple has always one really big redesign after 4 years. After 2 years they have a some pretty big revision of the architecture, and in between is the just small evolution. And you can see here after 4 years Apple released first 6 LU monster CPU on the world, 2017, guys. So Apple is doing every 4 years big, like a complete architecture redesign. So yeah, and it was probably planned. So Jim Keller left Apple with this in his mind, and he probably knew what is coming from the ARM, the performance and everything, the instruction set development, and he knew that the ARM is the future actually. And but back in 2015 nobody knew that, and back in 2012 like there was only few people who knew that the ARM is going to be the best architecture, and it will take a majority of CPU market. Yes, so 2012, Jim Keller was leaving Apple with the knowledge that A7 Cyclone was already finished, first 4 LAU CPU on the world, together with Intel Haswell. Intel Haswell was also first 4 LAU CPU on the world, and he started development of the Zen architecture, And kind of coincidence that the Zen is also for LAU CPU. Even the development started 2012, when actually on market was only Intel Ivy Bridge. So it was not actually a reaction. Zen and its 4LU architecture was not a reaction on Intel, because Intel had only 3 LAU design on market. So it's kind of clear that Jim Keller really brought to AMD a lot of know-how about the future architecture trends, and not only about the architecture in the backend, but also about the instruction set. And his suggestion was the ARM is going to be the future. So that's why they started to develop really ambitious AMD K12. But let's look how many things happened in 2015. It was actually the disaster. It was completely disaster, and it happened several really major things. One of the major things what happened in 2015 was the Intel Skylake. Intel Skylake was a big problem for AMD because it arrived on market 2015. It was 2015, it was 2 years before Zen1 came on the market, actually, and they knew the performance of the Zen1 from the simulations, and the Intel has at least 10% higher IPC. So it was 2 years ahead of AMD Zen. It had a higher IPC, and the biggest issue was also the frequency. It was like a frequency almost 5 gigahertz, while AMD Zen 1 was somewhere about 3.6, 3.8 gigahertz. And it was really disaster for AMD. Their new 4LU architecture was like outperformed by Intel Skylake in every way, and it was a huge problem. So it was the really disaster for AMD. So AMD was like probably it was kind of emergency state there. Everybody was like probably really unhappy, and they need to figure out how to fight the Intel, because they suggested also in 2 years there is coming probably some new big architecture. Probably Intel Ice Lake was scheduled somewhere to 2017. It should enter the market, and at that time, 2015, nobody knew actually that Ice Lake is going to be delayed like 3 or almost 4 years because of 10 nanometer manufacturing process, but the architecture was probably planned for 2017. So it was really big problem for AMD, and the Ice Lake would have they was suggested, 2017 as a Zen 2 higher IPC. So they was like, okay, Ice Lake will have like a 30% IPC lead over Zen 1. So we need to have some answer, and we need to bring something really sooner. So AMD was under unbelievable pressure here, because they set it. They was running 2 independent parallel developments. It was the ARM lineup and x86 lineup. So here comes the politic game, because back in 2014, this is the year when Rory Reid was fired from AMD, and he was replaced by Lisa Su. And today we can see that Lisa Su leadership is kind of successful, but it's a really question, because maybe 2025 we will look at this event as a really big mistake for AMD, because Lisa Su put actually the priority for x86, because instead of developing ARM and x86 on parallel. Actually, they decided under the pressure of the Intel Skylake, instead of a 3 years cycle for the new generation of the CPU, they decided to cut it in half and cancel the ARM project. So they can use the resources for x86 and bring the new CPU generation not every 3 years, but every 18 months. And this is what every AMD source is saying. They have a cycle 18 months approximately. And you can see it's not coincidence that the 2015 here, it was after the K12 was already taped out. And if we take a look, the Zen2 architecture was released 2019, minus 4 years of the normal development is, voila, 2015. So it's another evidence that the K12 team was moved for working on Zen2 directly. But the question is why Jim Keller left. It's not because only about the ARM, but because Zen architecture x86 was also his child, so he can continue development of the Zen 3 and the another architectures. So why actually, the big question is why Jim Keller left? Well, I think we can see today, we can judge, because we know the ARM Fujitsu, the supercomputer ARM CPU, which is a kind of, which is actually #1 supercomputer, and using only CPUs, and is beating NVIDIA GPUs. And it has a brand new instruction set, SVE, for the matrix multiplication and for the high performance computing. This is the evidence that ARM instruction set is way better than x86, because this was announced, this SVE supercomputing instruction set was released 2016, and Intel released their first matrix multiplication instructions. They announced it 2020, this year, the AMX, and it is actually for the Silicon 2021 for Sapphire Rapids. So you can see, and we have no info about AMD when they are going to support matrix multiplication. It could be even further, it's somewhere in the future. So it's big problem for AMD. And even Intel has a big delay, because the development, when the ARM Fujitsu started development somewhere in 2015, somewhere in here, it means the ARM Fujitsu and ARM was cooperating on the instruction set for the SVE instructions. They were cooperating probably 1 or 2 years before they started the development of the CPU. So it was somewhere around 2015. And because AMD was one of the best customers for ARM, and it was aiming to be #1 in the server market for the ARM servers, I'm pretty sure that the AMD and Jim Keller knew about SVE development, and they were actually planning for the future use. And here comes the problem. They probably planned K13, the successor of K12. It was planned again to be in parallel developed with the Zen 3, and K13 should use SVE. This is the big thing. This is the supercomputing instruction set, and this is game changer. This is really game changing in favor of the ARM architecture, and Jim Keller knew that. And this is the reason, this is the main reason why Jim Keller left, because he saw the huge opportunity. He saw actually the ARM instruction set is not only better right now, it's going to be much better than x86. even in the future it will. And they canceled his new development of the K13. And so Jim Keller left because of the K13. And this is, yeah, I think my opinion is it was a huge mistake from AMD. And I think history will show that it was one of the biggest mistakes AMD did. And it's no coincidence that Jim Keller left. He left for the first time when they canceled his really ambitious original hammer architecture. The K8 later on was released as a hammer, but it was actually only the evolution of the K7 architecture. It was not the original Jim Keller's architecture. So every time when Jim Keller leaves, it suggests that something wrong with the management is. So I think that Lisa Su is not really good CEO actually, because it was a huge mistake. The K12 and the K13 canceling, even this is my suggestion, the K13. But of course, they were planning some successor to K12. So yeah, let's call it K13. And all the timeline coincidences shows that the K13 would probably have also the SVE vectors. And you know, the SVE is a big thing. It's like a up to 248-bit wide floating point unit. Guys, this is like a 4 times wider than actually the AVX 512. Okay, so let's to sum up. So it's pretty clear that the canceling of the K12, AMD made a really huge mistake. Not because of the K12, but because of the future ARM CPUs. Because with the K13 and all the SVE new instructions, and even there is coming SVE2 for next year actually, and there is coming new ARM v9 Matterhorn Cortex, which will be probably 6 LAU beast using SVE vectors. This is a really huge thing which is coming, and even Nuvia is scheduled for the next year, which is suggesting absolutely incredible IPC. So it must have somewhere like 8 LAUs at least, and also ARM v9 SVE vectors. And AMD missed this unique opportunity, and that's why Jim Keller left. So it was really big mistake. And yeah, and so in terms of IPC and the future performance, it is really a huge mistake, because if we take a look about Nuvia is suggesting 2000 points in Geekbench, which is absolutely incredible number. You know that x86, the fastest Comet Lake, 5.3 gigahertz, it's achieving somewhere 1460, something like this, not overclocked. But Nuvia next year, like having 2000, somewhere here, 2000. This is like a absolutely monster. This is like the IPC suggested for the Nuvia is actually somewhere like a 2.4 higher than Intel Comet Lake. Yes, more than double higher IPC, which comes from 666 points per gigahertz from Geekbench 5. This is absolutely incredible. And even Golden Cove next year will be outperformed by 72% IPC by Nuvia Phoenix. This is absolutely incredible. And this is a really bad situation for x86. This is what actually AMD made a really huge mistake. Because if we look at the next year, what is coming into market, 2021 here, look at this performance. Nuvia is number one. This is Apple A15 will be somewhere close to the Nuvia Phoenix. No surprise, because the Nuvia Phoenix, the chief designer, is actually the Gerard Williams III, actually the guy who designed those Apple CPUs. Actually, he went from Apple and he created new startup, his own startup. So yeah, Nuvia is the new king of the IPC, with absolutely incredible IPC. New Matterhorn is coming also, and look at the Matterhorn. It will have a IPC about Apple A12. This is like a 60% above Comet Lake. 60%. This is a huge IPC, because so even the Golden Cove with 40% uplift will be outperformed by Android smartphones, guys. In terms of IPC, at least, of course, they will be higher frequency. But in the servers, when all CPUs runs around 3 gigahertz, yes, so the ARM in the server will be outperforming Intel and AMD really big way. So even Zen 3 and Zen 4, which is coming 2021, even Zen 4 will be something like a 15% higher. So it will probably reach Golden Cove, but it will be outperformed by ARM Cortex Matterhorn, the license cores, and not talking about the Nuvia. So an AMD actually missed the opportunity to jump on this high IPC train, and also for a better architecture. So yeah, back in 2015, I thought this is really good thing to cancel the K12. Today, I think it was really big mistake, and maybe we can talk in 2025, and somebody will watch this video. People will probably a lot of smiling, because x86 in 2025 will be probably really minor platform and dying already, and Intel and AMD will probably already manufacture the ARM CPUs.